And because the experience of loving Star Wars is my own, do you get sick of loving your mom? Do you get sick of loving your partner? Get sick of loving your child? They're not the same thing, but the love doesn't make you feel sick. It continually fills you. Even when people that you've loved so intensely have passed away, the love becomes something better.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Story Building, where it is 1 o'clock in the morning, but that's my fault for choosing to be born in Australia. Today's guest is one man Star Wars himself. It is Charles Ross. Hello and welcome to One Story Building.
Thank you. It's not 1 in the morning here. It is about close to 11.
Well, you're the lucky one for being in Canada.
I guess so. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm in Canada. I'm actually on the west coast in a place called Victoria on Vancouver Island.
On the east coast of Australia, there's a city called there's a state called Victoria.
There's indeed.
Australia really is the upside down Canada of the world. We've just established that.
We're Commonwealth jewels. I think people that were happy not to be living in England that came and populated these two pieces of ground. It's weird though. I remember asking an Aussie when I was traveling around Turkey, I said, what do you think of when you think of Canada? And he goes, I have never, ever thought of Canada in my life. I thought it was so honest. I felt deflated.
Well, as much as I would love to immediately jump into questions about Star Wars, and if we could just talk about Star Wars for hours and hours, I have to ask, what were your earliest experiences with theatre that led you to being the man that you are today?
Theatre. It was interesting. I don't think I ever saw any live theatre. It was actually doing some sort of form of live theatre. So there was the Christmas pageant when I was 4 going on 5 years of age. And I got to play a pyramid in the story of the 3 wise men. It was, the whole story of Jesus being born. So I was a pyramid, and I remember thinking, well, this is great because you get to be in front of people. You didn't have to do very much, and it was kind of just a beautiful way to feel like you're part of something that wasn't like regular life. And I didn't really know what theater was, and I still don't entirely. The next real experience I can remember was doing another Christmas pageant where I was Santa Claus. That was fun and exciting. And I had moved from the town proper out to a farm, still in the same town, totally different school. And I think I was having a difficulty adjusting to being in a new school. And the interesting thing I noticed, and I did notice it in grade 3, that when you did something like theater, when you were performing, you can sort of wear some kind of, I hate to call it a mask, but in some ways you can put on something that allows you to be the person you want to be, even though you don't necessarily have a rapport with everybody. You can sort of create a sense of familiarity, be the inner self that you want to be, but not have to go through the process of human interaction and feeling bullied or stupid or like you're saying the wrong thing. Theater was just sort of a way to bypass life and instantly get to the part of communicating. So once again, I moved into a completely different city in the province or the state that we lived in. We moved about 800 kilometers away. So once again, I was faced with moving away from everything, all my friends, and starting fresh, or in this case, it just felt stale. And my father and my mother were separating. So I wasn't seeing my father anymore as well. That kind of brought some things to the forefront where theater became more about life. I was kind of hiding from the fearful child that I was, the child that I was hurting on the inside. And I was kind of using improv and putting on a bit of a front to cope. I didn't quite realize that was a unhealthy thing. But I remember that I had a teacher who, she somehow noticed that these things were going on with me and was able to sort of create a divide. This is the time for theater, and this is how you can perform. This is the time to be yourself. She did that for me, just through her regular instruction. And I did elocution, I did poetry readings, at grade 5. I did the school play. I wrote a little play, little things that happened then, which kind of created a line where when I was being myself, the kid, I was rather struggling, but theater gave me something that made me feel like I was winning. So as I got older, I kind of kept those things running concurrently. I started to feel better as a person, and theater was still feeding me. And I guess it still does. It very, very difficult though, when the pandemic came along, because that element of performing and being in theater, when it was sort of taken away, the career that I developed up to the point of the pandemic coming down, when there was no longer the ability to travel, to perform in large spaces. You could do stuff on, virtually, but it just isn't the same thing. And for people that are performers, they know it's not the same thing doing something virtually. I really felt, like so many people did, just a real sense of a major part of who I am being hobbled, being maybe not stolen from me, because no one stole it. I just didn't know how to sort of find that part of me. And it was interesting because it kind of felt like being the kid and losing all the friends that made life sort of worth living at school, the friends that brought you joy, losing that when I had to move. That when the world seemed to move in this bizarre place with the pandemic, that the other part of me that kind of lifted me up was suddenly compromised. So I was forced to use myself, my own personality, my own positivity, whatever there was, to keep my head above water. So it's not over, but I certainly feel that theater has been there for me in a way that I never intended for it to be. And being able to find a new relationship with it, sort of, as we were talking about jinxing, I don't want to say post-pandemic, but on this end of the pandemic, at this point of the pandemic, to have it sort of come back, it feels familiar and feels very scary, which is interesting.
I want to go back to something that you said, where you said that you hated to call the concept of performing as wearing a mask. Now, I've never had much of a problem referring to performing as wearing a mask, but why do you dislike the term?
Putting on a front. I don't think there's nothing wrong with the term. I feel as though wearing a mask kind of harps back to grade 8 poetry, where there's something rather obvious, that you wear a mask. When you put on a front, you're performing. And if you do that as a person, you're wearing a mask, you're performing. It's not anything particularly new. There's nothing wrong if there's nothing new. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the mask. There's just, for me, it feels a little bit, I don't want to say cheesy either. I mean, theater is about if you do mask work, if you're doing the neutral mask, if you're doing any of the, we did a whole year of our theater movement component, physical theater, using just mask. And we did character mask for one whole half term. And then for the second half, we did neutral. And I found that incredibly challenging. And it's not there was never any, pump your fist in the air moment of like, I did it. I figured it out. There's a lot of work that has to happen to make that mask work. And that's very much how it is when you're wearing a mask as a person and using performance as a mask to be a full person. You're working hard to sometimes shield how you might actually feel as a person. Like if you have any feelings of low self-esteem, that mask can help you, or it has helped. It allows you to sort of facilitate those feelings, which are just hard to express. They might even feel embarrassing. Yet wearing this mask, like the clown knows, it's you kind of giving yourself the opportunity to be that aspect. And I deal a lot with people that do costuming, and I have watched so many friends who are costumers, some people who have toured with me. A friend of mine, Richard Mattix, he's amazing. When you meet him, he's nothing at all like what he is when he puts on the stormtrooper bucket. And he's not flicking a switch. He's not becoming theatrical. He becomes himself in a way that you don't usually come across. And that's permission, perhaps, by putting that mask on to become something bigger. And when he does, he's so engaging, so sharp and funny. And when he takes it back off, he's just Clark Kent again. He's the superhero is back to being his unassuming self. Whereas with theater, or the mask, it's you can be a different person. Yet when you assume that visage, you are suddenly more of yourself, and almost a superpower.
Yeah, that's so perfect. That's amazing. I completely agree. I get so annoyed when people think that if you're an actor, that must mean that you're just this outgoing, confident person. I am excruciatingly shy, but I'm fine getting on stage, because when you wear the mask, it sort of protects you. And it's weird how you can sort of be more of yourself on stage when you're playing pretend. When you're in the ball pit, you can just sort of, you can protect yourself a little bit by wearing that mask, and you just can become more confident. It's like acting is the shy person's revenge. It's like, see, I can do this. Stop bullying me for being shy. I might be bringing up some of my own traumas.
No, and that's fair. That's very fair to bring up your own traumas, because you sometimes meet blowhard types, people that are seemingly full of confidence in certain situations, but if they were left alone on a stage or in front of a group of people speaking about a subject that they might in fact know great detail about, when they're up on stage or just in front of a crowd to talk, they're public speaking, they might in fact feel terrified. I have heard that it's one of the top 10 fears globally of people is public speaking, might even be in the top 5. Whereas for myself, I never have a problem talking. I just find I often have nothing to say that's of any real matter. It's like if I have something to say that has some, that actually has some worth. And I remember being in university, and I had just a crushing experience in my history, one of my theater history classes, where my professor was fielding all these questions, and I was in first year university, and everybody was saying something interesting. And so I tried to begin to speak about something that I felt was interesting. And that professor just cut me off. They stopped listening and they just talked right over me and just kept going on. And I remember just feeling so, I felt like I was stuffed back into that place where I felt like I was all alone, even amongst people that I considered to be my peers. And I don't know if you ever feel this, but I often feel like I'm the only person in the world that feels a certain way, that I am the only person that feels truly alone. And there's that imposter syndrome idea that's really making its way through a lot of people's heads, at least it is here in North America. a lot of people sort of identifying with the imposter syndrome. And sometimes I feel like an imposter to life itself, and that I'm actually not even part of the group that I think I'm part of. I'm in fact not part of any group, and I'm not wanted in any group. And it doesn't matter how many masks I wear or how well I can speak, that at the center of everything, that I'm actually not worth anything. I have no substance on the inside. It isn't true. It's just the feeling. And somehow theater has given me over my life a shield where I can appear as though I'm full of confidence and I want to be out there and I can say things and I must be great to have at a party. But that person that's inside, the real person that I am, has to work a lot harder to develop, to keep up, and to feel like I'm worthy and as good as all of my friends and as interesting as other people. And for some reason, I don't know why, but there's a part of me that's always focused on the negative things that happen in my life. And that is what that's like my base. All the good things in the world that ever happen, it may as well be rain for all its ability to sort of influence me. It's the stuff that's bad that I just heap upon myself like mud and muck and cement, and it just weighs me down. And I know that I'm not alone in having that tendency. It's just that the tendency feels, or I guess the effect is that having all this stuff that I piled on top of myself, the negativity that I believe and I hold on to, it's holding me down, but I know I can begin to sort of break it away. And that underneath it, all that muck, all that negativity is actually the same positive person who is full of confidence. And I just need to spend more time sloughing off that stuff. I don't know how you can do it forever. And sometimes I wake up in the morning and even though I felt great the night before, it somehow insinuated itself again. That stuff's still there. Like, why should I remember negative things like I do? And yet I do. And, when you were talking about the one story, obviously, this is the whole idea of your podcast, is that at some point, perhaps in the hero's past, where one is gifted powers and the antagonist is gifted the same powers. I don't think there's any one particular moment in which those paths might diverge from each other, but perhaps it's just a certain way that, like Anakin Skywalker, he seems to remember and absorb the bad. That's the stuff that his life is hard, but he seems to be taking on the negative, and that's what he's using as his currency in life. That's what's informing his decisions. And sometimes I feel like that for myself, like that stuff continually informs my decisions. Luckily, not when I'm making a new show or when I'm performing on stage or even interacting with my family. But somehow inside of me, the person, that negative stuff, it just has incredible holding power. And I have to be reminded by myself and sometimes by outside people of all the good stuff and how that negativity really doesn't have any cash value. It's just hard to digest.
You mentioned Anakin Skywalker, so I'm going to use that as a segue into Star Wars talk. Even before we talk about one-man Star Wars, we'll get to there eventually, I swear. Your experience with Star Wars, where did that come from, and what gave you the motivation to make a whole show about it?
Well, it's really comes down to three things: childhood, the sort of second childhood, which is what I call graduation from university, and then the necessity, the willingness to do anything to try to become an adult, to become I wouldn't say a Jedi, but become a working individual. See, when I was a kid and I didn't assign any need to find worth in watching Star Wars, it was something I just loved to do. I didn't have to have any, I didn't have to sort of produce results. Why are you watching Star Wars so many times? You know, I would just watch it because it continually filled me full of love, and I love to immerse myself into that world, just in my head, watching the movie. And the first time I ever saw Star Wars anything was a toy commercial, because I was too young to go to see the very first movie when it came out. Too young. By the time the second one was being filmed and developed, however, Star Wars stayed in the cinemas for, at least where I lived, for about a year. So within that period of time, the toys, the merchandising had really developed, and there was an opportunity to actually go see the film. You didn't have to wait in line forever just to go see it. So I was able to sort of have my first exposure to Star Wars at all was the music and the toys during television. So I saw those things, and even though I hadn't seen it yet, I knew I wanted to, and I knew that there was really interesting little toys that were attached to it. So it appealed to, you know, whatever merchandisers are trying to merchandise towards, the children's need to be part of something and to play. And Star Wars seemed to, from the first opportunity of knowing anything about it, it promised fun, it promised play. So I went and saw a double feature when my family had gone to Maui, so Hawaii. My dad was working on condominiums there. He's an architect. So we were visiting there, and my dad took me to see a double feature of Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope. So I saw the two films for the first time on the big screen that way, not realizing that there was a third one that was coming along. I actually was young enough still to believe that was the end of the story. My dad assured me that there was a third one.
What a depressing ending.
Well, there was no trilogies at the time. There wasn't as though there was trilogy like there is today, or even more so. It wasn't obvious to me as a kid that there was more story to follow. But he said, yeah, there's another one that'll come out that'll tell the entire story. I would say my entire initial exposure to Star Wars happened before my big move from the town I was born in, the farm that I lived on, when I finally made this big move to a brand new place. And I think because we lived on a farm and I'd watched a lot of Star Wars, I had a lot of time to sort of make fun for myself, because none of my friends were near to us. They all lived miles away on different farms. Star Wars was a big part of my imagination, my play. So was Lord of the Rings. These were great because they were books that I could read, that they also seemed to be that there was like the promise of an adventurous world that was somehow waiting for me in my imagination, and maybe even for real. When I was a kid, I thought that maybe it really did exist. When I moved to this new place, theater became more part of my life, Star Wars less so. And if you kind of carry me through high school, university, where I studied theater at the University of Victoria, in the city I still live in, I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater. I was, I studied performing, acting. Coming out of university, I was faced with what most graduates or people that come out of a theater school, or just if they come out of high school and they want to be actors, you need to find your direction. Where do you start? Do you start in film? Do you start in TV? Do you do theater? I chose theater. It's the one that appealed and fed me the most. It also felt like the one that I could most instantly make inroads into. One of my best friends, the director of One Man Star Wars, he is TJ Daw. We went to university with each other. We're the same age. He was doing solo shows and was doing them on the fringe festivals. So he'd gone to, at the time, he'd gone to Orlando, and then across Canada, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Edmonton, Victoria, Vancouver, places you may never have even heard of. But he had done a couple tours with solo shows. And it appeared to me that this was the easiest way to try to make some money, maybe get some reviews. Star Wars was something I still loved. And I had watched another friend of mine do a show that was based upon Star Trek. He did a solo show that was based on Star Trek. And it seemed that maybe I could do a show that was nothing but the entire history of film done by one person in an hour. And when I sat down to actually write something, I ended up writing the Star Wars show for 3 people because I couldn't figure out how one person could do it. And I had sort of intended on doing a solo show about all of film, but I kind of got hung up and sidetracked by making this show for 3 people that was Star Wars. And I remember giving this script to my friends that I intended to be in the show with me, and they didn't understand what I was going for. So I gave them, what you should never do if you're, if you're trying to let the script read for itself. I did a reading. I read what I envisioned the show to sound like, and they said, "Well, just do that." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, no. It has to be 3 people. It won't be interesting as one person." They said, "No, it is." And I refused to believe them. So I ended up making this 20-minute show, basically the script that I'd written. And I just did that in front of a group of people, not knowing if it would work or people would they even pay attention? Would they get bored? And it went so well. It was a group, the group that I did it for were not Star Wars fans. They were just people. And if anything, they were theater people that might even be more highfalutin. They'd be much more into George Bernard Shaw than they would be George Lucas. And yet they were able to follow it and follow the bizarre style. Because my big champions when I was in university were Harold Pinter and like Samuel Beckett, sort of absurdist type of things. And this seemed to almost fit into that sort of style because it was ridiculous. It wasn't theater as much as it was theatrical and absurd, almost even performance art, things that I would not want to use to try to sell my show. I mean, Samuel Beckett can sell if you have Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen in the show. Mm-hmm. But not people aren't going to be lining up around the block to go see Endgame or something. They're going to, they're not. It's just simple. Whereas Star Wars, being told in this similar fashion with huge editorial jumps by one guy on stage, no costume, no set, no props, I didn't think it would work. I still don't understand if it does, but this is what I do. And people are able to follow it. It's absolutely bizarre because I'm bridging my experience, my inside experience of Star Wars with my love of theater and my need to make a living, but also there's a need to be in front of people, to perform. And it's hard, you must experience it yourself, and other people must as well. There's something that comes from being on stage and performing. It feeds, I don't know, is it your ego or is it something else? Is it a passion possibly to be in front? What's that?
It could possibly be ego. Maybe people are just desperate for attention, but I think a lot of it has to do with. I mean, this is why people bow at the end of a performance. It's like a gift from the audience to the performer and to the performer from the audience. It's this raw exchange. Like
it's like you both signing the contract at that point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They've already paid the ticket, but really it's like that is the contract being finally sealed at the end that you did the show, we loved it, thank you. And that's all we're going to have. They might come back. I mean, how bizarre is it to talk to you after years ago being in Perth, doing the show that you saw, and me being able to talk to you now? I think of the trajectory of our lives, how similar, how different they might have been, and yet here we are now. That's an amazing thing to think of, that to try to articulate that to a kid, especially the kid that I was, and even the kid that's inside of me now, but the child that loves Star Wars, to be able to tell them you will someday, because of your love of Star Wars, talk to a friend and colleague who lives in Perth about storytelling. I mean, it's impossible to sort of to plan that. I feel it's impossible to plan that. And yet, I don't know if there's any meaning to life. I really don't. But you could almost sum it up for a kid and say, this is part of the meaning of what you love, is that long-term connections, you'll have a moment to sort of to express how you feel. And it's not just theater. It's this talking to you right now for those that will listen, and who knows how long it will last for, because, you know, if there was a great EMP, maybe it would disappear, but there will be an opportunity to think about your life a bit more, to find some kind of way to sum up the experience you've had and where you're at in this moment.
How many times have you seen Star Wars to know it and perform it so well and so often?
You know, my mother kept account when I lived on the farm. I recorded the initial Star Wars off of television before we moved to this farm. My father had bought a home video recorder, and you were allowed to record things off of television. You weren't, you know, in trouble for doing that. So I watched it. I think she kept a mark on the calendar about 400 times, a ridiculous amount of times. But keep in mind, I didn't actually sit down and watch it that many times. I would sometimes put it on almost as background noise, because we also didn't have any television reception on the farm that we'd moved to. So to have something on the television would usually be a video. So, but she had the wherewithal to keep a tick on the calendar. I think she had originally thought she was going to, you know, wag her finger. You've watched it 40 times. You got to stop watching it. She just didn't. She just wanted to see how many times that I did. So, yeah, that was about the number that I had. She showed me 2 calendars that had a mark on it. And it was around the time that we moved to the new town that I stopped watching it all the time. And we had television reception in the new town that we moved to. But oddly enough, I'd gotten used to not depending upon television as my main source of entertainment.
Back into theatre, the superior art form. So, what is it like traveling all around the world and being able to support yourself with acting money?
It's bewildering and terrifying, because I always feel like it's going to come to an end, an abrupt end. I think it's the initial. Remember, I was earlier I was talking about there's negativity and how that seems to always be there. For me, when I would have before I started doing Star Wars as my main means of making a living, I was traveling to do theater gigs wherever they happened to be. And always, as soon as I established a gig, I knew that 3 months down the road, there'd be the need for another gig. I'd be unemployed, continually unemployed. So I was continually chasing that sloughing away ground. It felt like the ground was always going to fall out from beneath me if I didn't take steps. And even though I've had this gig that has been self-generated and has been fortunate to go as far afield as it has, I am continually aware that the ground will give out. At some point, no one will come to see the show anymore. It will no longer have any value, or at least that's how I'm afraid that things might be. So it feels amazing and terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. And I don't quite know how to, sort of emerge on the other side and feel like confidently this is all going to work out forever. I make new shows, and the new shows, unfortunately, because they're not Lord of the Rings, they're not Star Wars. It's like the new shows, the new stories that are being created these days, or even for the last 40 years, I don't know if there's been anything that's been quite as had the same resonance as Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. And I think it's because things went from the analog world to the digital world, and the way we consume things really is different. And you don't have to wait to see a show. You can watch it right away, even if you don't go to the theater. Somebody's going to pop it onto the internet. You'll be able to watch it somehow. So, in a lot of ways, what makes things special is sort of waiting for it to come out, and that period of time. There's so many things that are pending that it's hard to sort of pour all of your passion into one thing, because there are so many options now. So it's almost like nothing's had to be as special as Star Wars or as special as Lord of the Rings. And I mean, that it's arguable because there's been huge stories, huge, wonderful productions that have been done. But I don't know. It kind of feels like there was just a period of time that things became as special globally as the initial Star Wars trilogy and Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings, not only did it have all those years to be a beloved piece of literature, but then when the films came out that Peter Jackson had produced, directed, those were so mind-bogglingly amazing, even for all the amendments that were made, the revisions, the edits that were done to Lord of the Rings story. They were still so fantastic, and you had to wait for them. They took a year before they were released. So even though you knew the story, you just wanted to see the way it was going to unfold, the way that they were telling it. And I'm not saying that this will never happen again, but it's we just get so, we need that immediacy. And if you think of Facebook to Twitter to TikTok, to use those three things, TikTok is immediate, and to be famous, to be a star, how much actual time does it take out of your whole life to achieve that? It conceivably doesn't take as much, but it's a total skill set. And there's a matter of luck, timing, just the personality that makes those stars, that make those, celebrities. And I'm still theater, so I'm taking something that has like a slow burn in my experience, and that's creating a slow burn, which is theater. Because yes, you can do theater on digitally, but it's not the same thing. And I think that every actor, every performer would feel that there's some truth to that. That if you're filming something for a feature film, you do really have to get parts of what you're saying correct for the director once, and you can have many takes. And they might even use several takes to create a more varied performance, which is actually edited down. Whereas with theater, it has to be right live now. And because of that, the story that's inspiring that theater has to be, for me, has to sort of almost be part of my fiber, my creativity. It's had more time to make you have your short-term memory and your long-term memory. It's like a long-term memory. Doing my shows as many times as I have, I cannot mess up, because other than something falling on top of me, because the shows I've done them so many times that they're part of who I am. So
yeah. I remember I saw you when I was maybe 13, which was a certain amount of time ago. So you must be so grateful that the shows that you do have been going on for so long. But how do you not get sick of doing the same show over and over again for years and years and years?
Well, I call it, I would like to call it love, and how it's being created. You only get a chance to be yourself. And because the experience of loving Star Wars is my own, do you get sick of loving your mom? Do you get sick of loving your partner? Get sick of loving your child? They're not the same thing, but the love doesn't make you feel sick. It doesn't, it continually fills you. Even when people that you've loved so intensely have passed away, the love becomes something better. And I've often imagined, well, what would my life be like if I was working a job for somebody else, doing something that I begrudgingly, am employed doing, just a job? Would I not get sick of that? And if I didn't, I mean, maybe I would just learn that that was my lot in life, and I would live that life and say, well, this is what I do. To be able to share something of myself doing a show, and I mean, it's amorphous. The audience is always changing, always. And for people, it's always the first time they've seen it. Not everybody, but for the most part, it's the first time they've ever seen it. I forget that. And going to different parts of the world, I don't even know how Star Wars might have impacted that part of the world. Sometimes it hasn't much at all. But the audience that's come out to see my show is it's either the people that love theater, or the people that love theater and Star Wars, or just love Star Wars. They're the people I want to have there at my show. So I've never lived another life, and I don't know what it is other than what I'd have as a mental block in my head, or taking on other people's opinion that, I must get sick of doing the show. It's like, well, people would get sick if they had to watch my show every day. But I'm allowed to do this to make a living and to see the world. I feel very fortunate, and I never planned it out. You couldn't have planned this out. Couldn't have. It would have gone. It would not have worked out. It's just been a road that twists and turns, and I can't really see what's ahead. And anytime I've ever felt like I know what's coming ahead, life throws a pandemic at you. And yeah, so I'm very fortunate and happy.
Have you noticed any differences in the audiences of the places that you've been? Are American audiences different to Australian audiences that are different to Canadian audiences? What are their idiosyncrasies?
I can't say that I know exactly what the audiences are thinking, but I know that personality-wise, Ireland has a very different way of responding. And that's not to say that Star Wars didn't have a massive effect there. I'm just not sure if people found the stories to be humorous or even inspiring. It might have seemed a bit too true to the world that they lived in, and yet they went to see it anyway. Star Wars. Just that there's sort of a larger power that's weighing down the world that they're living in. So Ireland had and Northern Ireland to the Republic of different reaction to one man's Star Wars, even Star Wars in general. Any country that's very much has a rich cultural product, that they're people, or they make music. Yeah, Star Wars is there, absolutely, but they're still intensely proud of what they produce. And because of that, it's not the same thing. Like going to America, where you could argue that Star Wars is an American product, even though it was mostly filmed in England. with actors from around the world, and Americans as well. And then the new ones were filmed in Australia, I believe.
That's right.
And then from all around the world. They really are international productions. But in America, people go big. They love to join clubs. They love to be proud of things that are American. And even though there's not one single American flag in Star Wars, it feels like a very much an American production. So it's my show sort of had its larger audiences, the first ones I experienced in America. So I'd say the ones that were surprising was when I went to Australia, because I had no idea. I'd never been. I always wanted to go, but I had no idea how big Star Wars was there. And it makes sense with the new Star Wars films being there, but also the original trilogy had such a massive, impact on people there as well. But just the types of people that came out to see theater, I had no idea. I mean, I think of all these fantastic Australian actors who, they might have been in Neighbours, but then they were also in, they're part of like the Australia's national theater, and then they're Hollywood stars. So of course, people are so nationally proud of what of their own people, and their own performers, and their connection to something like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. So yeah, I think the only place where I kind of got what I thought would happen was when I went to Dubai and did the show there, because I couldn't figure out why I was there doing the show when I was. And when I got there, I just felt so much like it was it didn't even feel like a real place. It is a real place, but it's like a place that has no decades of history. The sand does, the people do, but the city itself is all brand new. And I thought, how is it? Everybody must kind of wonder sometimes when they look around, like, where am I? What is this place? And people that came to see the show there, they were from everywhere conceivable, every conceivable place, and there was no sense of, this is the country I'm in, this is the place that I'm in, these are the people from there. I experienced what I expected, which was an extremely varied reaction, and people that were leaving the theater weren't even leaving in clumps of groups. There was a lot of business people leaving. There were no families coming to see the show. It was bizarre. Whereas, go to Perth, you had the whole family coming out, and people bought tickets last minute, which was crazy. They would listen to the radio and would come out to see the show. That was something that was a weird connection between Ireland and Australia, that your presenters were earnest presenters. They because there was a certain time when I was in America where it was all about shock radio, and they would try to sort of skewer you with insults. They'd let you get your guard down, and then they would try to nail you to the board to watch you squirm for whatever reason. That was what they were doing. So when I got to Australia, I kept waiting for the gavel to smash into me. It never did. I went, oh, they're nice people. Okay, that's great. That's much more what I was hoping for. But yeah, there's nice parts of the world, and there's parts of the world that are slightly more bullying. Yeah, and that it feeds into what people support and what they don't support.
It's such a compliment when a Canadian says that a certain kind of people are nice. I would have thought that Canada's like the nice place of the world.
I think it has that sort of it definitely has that reputation. But I know a lot of people that I would not categorize as nice, who are as Canadian as you can get. But think that's anywhere, isn't it? I think in general, we tend to bend like a reed.
I would like to pick up on something that you said when you mentioned the Star Wars films that were filmed in Australia. You as in the Star Wars prequels, or at least episode 2 and a bit of 3, I forget. You referred to them as the new Star Wars films, but they're not the new Star Wars films, because the Disney ones are the new Star Wars films. What are your thoughts on the on Disney Star Wars?
Disney Star Wars or the prequels?
Disney Star Wars.
Disney Star Wars. Well, it's a funny thing becoming older and having sort of experienced the prequels, and then everything that's surrounding that. With the Disney offerings, it's I didn't actually know what to expect. I knew that they had, as they had sort of established in the initial The Force Awakens, they had a sandbox of old toys, of old ideas that were all they're all slightly immersed in the sand, and we kind of go over top of it. And we're going to use imagery. We're going to use technology that you're all very familiar with. We're going to have a couple of big stars, the big ones that you remember, but they're not the main characters. There's new main characters. And it kind of felt like it was really trying hard to create a story that we really cared about. And I don't know if they totally told the story. Like, I'm still not entirely sure what the story was about, other than that the Force survives, that the Jedi survive, but evil survives as well. It's just that, the story continued. And it's almost like the segue to new products and new stories. So it's like the TV stuff. Those are the things that seem to have the most potential, because they're not really. They're drawing on sources, but they aren't. I don't know. They're not sort of bound by a trilogy. They can kind of go on forever if they wish to. And you can bring in different stars if you can make them work in a storyline or do a flashback. You can continue to tell the story. Disney just has kind of carte blanche to do whatever they want in the past, in the future, peripherally to the stories that are being told, and they've done that so far. So I just hope they continue to create, because they're bringing in so many people who have been inspired at some point by Star Wars, who look at all the reams of material that there is, and they look at the universe, which we're going to go that way. We're going to deal with those people. We're going to talk about this for a bit. Everybody's along for the ride. In fact, you can't wait. So with the new trilogy, I can't say that I was disappointed, because I didn't know what to expect. And I have never, ever had any input into the new stories. Never. I'm just like everybody else, waiting to be told, this is what is, this is the story. Bye-bye. That's it. Thank you for coming to watch it. I will pretty much watch anything that comes out. And like when I was a kid, I wasn't really being picky. It was all candy, and it still is.
What do you think makes Star Wars and Lord of the Rings so special to so many people?
What makes it so special? I will tell you what I think makes the story work. In either case, Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins, Bilbo Baggins, it's all about the disenfranchised person, somebody with presumably a pretty low station in life, unable to affect any real change in the world, who suddenly has adventure come to their front door, in some cases literally to their front door, where they are tasked with going on a massive adventure that completely takes them outside of their comfort zone. And in some cases, like with Luke, you're broken off from your family. You are taken away. You have no way to return. And within very little time, you have discovered that you have a power, that you have a lineage that's far bigger than you understood, and that you only person who can change the world to affect massive change. And whether you want to or not, you are in the trench. You're stuck all alone in the misty mountains, finding the ring. You're then taking that ring to throw into Mount Doom. You're the only person that's been able to be the thread to find its way through that hole in the needle. And at the end, you still can't quite do it. There's something else that comes, helps you. It's your past. It's your lineage. You find yourself being so intrinsically good that you can't find the bad in yourself that is necessary to solve that evil. But you affect that change. You do something, want to know that no matter how humdrum your life might be, that you are in fact the hero, that you are taken away from your comfort zone. You change the world. You're the only one that can do it. And then you can return back home in some fashion. You'll be changed forever. That, I wouldn't say, is appealing to the lazy person or the person that's not willing to believe in themselves. And yet it is. It's saying that the common person is in fact fully capable of being the greatest of all people. Hobbits, what is Luke? Is he an alien? I guess he must be. But anyway, you can change the world forever. And in doing so, you get to go to space. You discover new family, new brothers, sisters, and you reconnect with your family in a new way. You will never be the same, but the changes make you better than who you were, more of who you were. That, I think, is the appeal of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars at a simple level.
If someone wanted to do what you do, not necessarily a one-man show, but just take a theatre show on the road, how would they go about doing that?
Quite honestly, I think you'd have to build yourself a bit of a team. That team may not be on the road with you all the time, but I think that you have to have probably a director. I would definitely have somebody, and it doesn't have to be somebody that's dictated everything, but someone you can talk to even when you're far away from them, if they're not on the road with you, about where you're at with the show. In a sense, you're decanting your experience and having somebody to talk about it that knows the show intimately, that might even know what your own history with it, maybe your own issues that or hangups about the show that might exist. Because when you're out on the road, you don't necessarily have that person. You might have a stage manager, a technician, but their experience is different and they are coming from a different place. So trying to have some kind of a connection in that regard is very important. Maybe also, if you can, somebody else that has either read your work, even an outside eye, somebody that you can chat to, because you can very much get lost in reviews, bad or good. You can get lost in reactions, dull or extreme, and not really be able to almost have a compass point to be able to sort of continually check yourself. There's the practicalities of touring. If you really get into a long process of touring, I would do some interesting practical things. Think of the story of Joel versus the volcano. Have very good luggage. It's incredibly important to have something that gives you more room than you need, and always leave yourself a space that is not packed, because you are going to pick up stuff. You are going to, whether you wish to or not. And there's nothing worse than trying to lug your bag with things falling out or the zipper breaking. And that might seem very obvious, but it's surprising how I had to learn that the very, very difficult way. Having a bag that's busting open or just on the verge, or the zipper coming apart. Just try to source a decent or high quality piece of luggage whilst on tour. Good luck. You're going to spend so much money on doing it. Make sure you are outfitted properly. And to that end, I would also consider joining, if you haven't already done so, a frequent flyer club. And if they give the option of being able to have access to an airport club, it doesn't have to be the swanky one where you get free drinks, free internet, a place to sit down for a moment, to just sort of be able to have a chair that might just be yours. They're so small, but for those who have traveled a lot, know that the little things are what get to you. They're the little things that make such a difference. Also, if you're going to do any rail travel, if you go to Europe, or if you're going to travel around England, consider getting a rail pass. This is, once again, just I wouldn't say it's like an insider bit of knowledge, but nobody does this. Get yourself an unlimited rail pass. And if you really want to splurge a couple $1,000s more, get the first class one. My goodness, it doesn't matter which train you miss. It doesn't matter. You just get onto the next train. It doesn't even matter which company it is. Your pass gets you onto anything. And if you have a first class ticket, you also get to go to the nice car with the ministers of parliament, that are going back home. I don't necessarily want to sit there with them, but you're sitting and you have a coffee, have a sandwich. You don't have to continually figure out where you're going to find a place to sort of regroup, because when you're traveling, when you're touring, there's a part of you that you're trying to keep almost encased, like Woody the doll in Toy Story, where you're sort of vacuum sealed in something where you can not sort of have sore muscles before the show's even begun, where you're not sweating and spent your last 20 pence because you needed to buy a bag of chips on the train. You want these little things to sort of work out for you, or going to airports, having an opportunity to just have a refreshment, to go into a toilet where you're not cheek to jowl, splash some water on your face. A lot of these clubs, these travel clubs, they're worldwide. So you could be flying on Singapore Airlines and still, be able to use your same flight privileges when you're going to Canada, going on Lufthansa, and you're heading to Hamburg. Those are little practical things that they may seem like ridiculous, but they're not. So, yeah, and I guess if you're gonna tour, just having some kind of a team is really the most important part. And you'll define what that team is, because they might be on tour with you, or they might just be people that you keep in contact with.
It's good to be comfortable when you are about to jump on stage, and for the next hour or two you have to be on the whole time.
Yeah. And anything that takes the pressure off, that keeps you feeling comfortable.
You mentioned that your one-man shows get directed by somebody else. Now, that isn't that strange to someone who knows this stuff, but when you are just yourself doing a show that you wrote and it's just you, how does that get directed by someone else?
It doesn't really. It doesn't. It's having an outside eye. It's having a friend who's also a professional who knows how to talk to you and to your sense of humor in a way that only a friend could, but also a professional would. Also a person that you can get into a tiff with, sometimes a big argument about something, and that you have friendship to sort of fall back upon. And you've also gone through the whole process of sometimes having arguments about things and being able to see past that argument. Sometimes they're just able to make big choices for you that you're not willing to do. And it sometimes takes a friend to tell you something that's hard to hear. And when I say hard to hear, it's, you might have a part of the show that you've put so much energy into, you want it to be so good, and it doesn't work. So artistically, you just snip it. And sometimes it takes a friend to be able to deliver that hard truth. You might be pissed off at them.
So sorry, do you have any examples of parts of your show that you really wanted to keep in, but it just had to go for the greater good?
Well, you see, a director can never force you to do something when you've written it. I think I had a lot more of the Emperor and Luke, that in Jedi where the Emperor was trying to, lure Luke over, seduce him to the dark side. I had a lot more that was there that I was doing because I loved to do it. And I thought I was really good at doing it. But it wasn't actually necessary. And that was hard to hear, because sometimes when jokes are wonderful, you think, oh, they're necessary to keep people entertained. Mm. But it actually bogs the show down, slows things down. So you might cut out really good material, which I thought I did. And, there was always the idea, well, we'll do a director's cut sometime, which was that, the parts that were cut out for direction's sake. I never have actually done it, but in theory I could.
So how much, if at all, have your shows changed over the, decade plus of doing them?
It's been 20 years of Star Wars. A lot, but a little. I know that not really saying anything. It feels like a lot to me. And yet, if you viewed it as a script, you'd say, it's not been that many changes at all. But what's informed my head, even like the injuries I have. I mean, I used to do some physical parts of the show that I wouldn't do now, but because I was trying to figure out the choreography on the fly, I thought, oh, sure, I can bend backwards. I'll do it. Until one day you hurt yourself, and you don't know you're going to hurt yourself until you do. So there's things I changed because they were just not manageable physical movements. So that actually made the show flow faster. And I think actually just made the show better. Just more sustainable over longer periods of time. I used a microphone. I never used a microphone in the beginning. So I just never thought I'd have to, because the audiences were maybe 200 people at the time. Well, who can't project to 200 people? But to do a show, 9 times in a week and, 2 matinees, that many times, the microphone's actually quite nice to have. So I've even changed the way things sound because they're amplified. I didn't know that I would have that opportunity. So I think that the way that things have changed is that it went from extreme analog to, it's still analog-ish, but there's supports. There's the lights. I never had lights before. I used knee pads and elbow pads and stuff. Never used those before. They've sort of become part of the show as time has gone on. And same with the microphone.
Oh, I have reached the last question that I always ask at the end of this. And that is, of course, why are stories important?
Well, I think stories are important because not of how they end, but how they begin. And that really the end it never really happens. And you would see that with the way Star Wars extends on forever, or even Lord of the Rings in the sense how it extends on forever. The story is all about kind of just the wave. And I think that we're reminded, and we become resistant to adversity because stories give the promise, sometimes present an example of overcoming what feels insurmountable. And that even when we are at our lowest and might in fact even make really bad choices, we see redemption. Stories are about hope. And it's not that life is hopeless, but it kind of reminds us that it's okay and that we're all part of I guess, a never-ending story, but we really are a never-ending series of stories. And, it's imagination, it's humans, it's aliens, and it goes inwards, outwards, and at some point, our story will end. But maybe there's just a promise that we might do one little thing to inspire that might predicate another thing. Mm. So thank goodness for that.
Mm. Well, should I wait for the background noise to finish?
No, you can just hear that my story continually calls, and what seems like a tragic moment is really just a 3-year-old experiencing the ups and downs. So, yeah.
Well, Mr. Ross, you have made 13-year-old me very, very happy. I wish I could go back and say that I was doing this right now. But nonetheless, thank you so much for coming on to One Story Building.
It's been my absolute pleasure.